Hello. So I'm here with my client Mary. We started working together probably 3 or 4 months ago now.
Yeah, I think it was around last November, was it? You filmed the
Yeah.
first
Well, we
podcast, yeah.
we were kind of like tentatively speaking to each other about working together for a while, and then it finally happened. I'm going to get into all that. But what I wanted to do before we do that is basically introduce you to anyone in my audience who might not know who you are, or anyone in your audience who might not know who I am. And we actually met each other because we had an office in the same office block a couple of years ago, and we kind of, as I said, tentatively started talking about working together then. And then fast forward a while, and we're working together. Um, so yeah, you can probably give a better introduction into what you do. So for anyone in my audience who might not know, and vice versa, what is it that you do, and what do you help people with, basically?
Yeah, well, about 4 years ago, I came up with the idea of Building Bliss. So it actually stemmed from because my background's working in construction as a lawyer, and it's a highly stressful industry, both the legal world and the construction world. And I felt that there was something that I could do to help people. I'd been on my own healing journey, uh, suffered from stress myself, had panic attacks, and then started doing meditation about 7 years ago. And it had really had quite a profound effect on me, and then got into more and more sort of wellness stuff, but was a bit put off by a lot of the wellness content that was out there because it was very, it just didn't appeal to me. I always use the example of people like in LA floating around in white in the sun, telling you to be mindful. And I'm like, well, that's all very well, but try getting two kids out the door when it's raining. The dog's just been sick on their PE kit. It's a bit, it's a bit hard to be mindful. So my tagline is wellness for real people. So Building Bliss, I started the actual Instagram channel about 4 years ago, but it was always with the intention of having a podcast surrounding it with telling the stories of real people, basically, of how they'd overcome adversity, what healing journey they'd been on. So did that for a few years. Obviously, had the pandemic in the middle of everything, and I think that probably really brought mental health into center stage for a lot of people because either they were at home with nothing to do, so they were forced to face their own thoughts, or they were working in a stressful environment if they were in the health service or whatever. So it grew through that, and then I was very committed to the podcast. I did struggle to get it off the ground because I had a very clear idea of what I wanted it to look like and sound like. So I found guests and did two of my own recordings to start off with, which were okay. The first one's just gone out, which was the one I filmed on a single camera and just the two microphones. But the editing process for me just flummoxed me. I did get my wife involved because she's a creative person, graphic designer, and she did start doing it. And I was like, it's just not. It's not a valuable use of my time for me to be editing. I want to focus on finding the guests, interviewing them, and getting the content great. So obviously, I knew you, Steve, from where we worked together, and you'd kept popping your head in, going, "Oh, I'm doing podcasts. If you need, you know." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And you're like, "I know the time will come. The time will come." And then I think in the end, I don't know how we actually. I think I must have just contacted you and said, "Look, I do need help with this podcast."
Yeah,
And then you came on board to start filming them professionally and doing all the
yeah.
editing. And
I
yeah,
feel like
fast forward
yeah,
to now
hundred
when
percent.
they're all out there now. Well, two episodes are out and
Yeah,
they're going out weekly.
but
So yeah.
it meant, honestly, like that's it, right? Like it's funny what you said then about the pandemic because I actually I'm actually working with a business coach now, and he was talking about values and mission and all that kind of stuff. And I look back at the values that I writ out pre-pandemic, and it was one of them was own every challenge, and I think that really sort of became a centre value for me when the pandemic was on because I think a lot of people found themselves in a position where nothing was really happening like in the
Mm.
world. Like we were literally in our house, right? So it was like, how can we maneuver something to actually give some value and contribute something to making it better? And my thing was making lots of videos. Like it was just making tons and tons of videos. Um, and in the end, started doing video editing, started doing social media workshops, started doing online stuff. And then when the world opened up again, it was like, okay, I can actually do this now. I can actually do this. And you take that risk, right? And I suppose it's the same with Building Bliss, where it's been this like sort of, don't know what the word is, like a nucleus of an idea for a long time, and then all of a sudden it was like, right, it's time to grow this now.
Yeah.
For anyone watching this, really interesting to me, and obviously we've talked about this privately, but the Pillars of Bliss, give me an idea around like where you came up with the Pillars of Bliss, and why they sort of resonated with you as a person, and ultimately guide the podcast now.
Yeah. Well, originally the pillars were different, and I think when I first came up with the idea of having pillars, I was trying to force it, and then literally it almost came as a download. I think I've done some meditation, been reading, and it really did just appear on the page in front of me. And then the pillars of bliss are bravery, laughter, inspiration, spark, and success. And I think that to me encapsulates everything that we go through in life and everything that we need in life to get us forward. And that's been probably actually hearing people's answers to the questions around the pillars has just affirmed that that's the case. And as we were saying, you know, in everyone's origin story, there is a moment of bravery. And I think it's been interesting to listen to people because they didn't ever consider themselves to be brave until I asked them that question. And then they've looked back at their life and gone, well, at the time, I kind of had to do it. But looking back now, I think, yeah, that was really brave. And then obviously the other stuff, the laughter is a central component for me because of my journey into stand-up comedy at the age of 45, which was always my childhood dream to do, but it's better late than never. And then obviously with the inspiration, spark, and success, it's about how we operate on a daily basis to find those things, and then how we define success to ourselves. And as I say, listening to everybody's stories, it's been great to see how different everyone's answers are.
Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. And then I actually got that as well when I was editing the podcast. And we talked about this a little bit pre this case study, or this video, whatever you want to call it, about the podcast. We came up with the framework for the podcast, but within that framework, my little shtick is frameworks equal flexibility. In the same way, discipline equals freedom. It's kind of the counterintuitive. Is it juxtaposition? The word?
Yeah, yeah.
Is that the
They're
word?
opposite in some ways, but they define each
Yeah,
other.
but
Yeah,
they dovetail each other well. Yeah.
yeah,
So if you have a lot of discipline, it will lead to long term freedom. If you have frameworks, people think frameworks are quite restrictive. So I'm working within this framework. I can't really go outside of this. But actually, it gives you the flexibility, right? Because within that framework, you're able to ask these like really hard hitting questions, and tell these hard hitting stories that actually a lot of people, like real people, like you say, relate to, and ultimately show a journey that someone just like them has gone on to ultimately where they want to be, right? So it's not just telling that story and giving that person a platform to actually tell a story. It's actually showing other people as well. Okay, well, this person's just like you. This person is not particularly special in any way, shape, or form. They're just a normal, real person, who's had this extraordinary story. And I think that's a very, again, without blowing smoke, I think that's very uplifting for people to see. And once it does get in front of more people, obviously, it's going to take off. But when you first started out, was that the idea for the podcast, or was it like more like a fun stand-up-y idea?
Well, it's funny because I found my notebook that I first wrote when I went on my first workshop course, and at that point, it was aimed at being funny on the podcast, but it was always meant to be uplifting. And I think, yeah, it evolved. It's definitely evolved, and I think perhaps as my healing journey evolved, and I saw how far I'd come, and what I'd done and what I'd needed to get there, it definitely it came to me as that was what people needed to hear. Because, as I say, there's a lot of like what I'd call celebrity podcasts out there, but I'm not sure people always relate to that because they seem, I don't, not elevated but separate. Whereas if it's someone who seems like you say, has had a similar story, you can relate a lot more to it. And I think it's been really nice actually, because I really respect the guests I've had on because they've been incredibly vulnerable in sharing the things that they're sharing, and it's been really nice that they've said thank you for giving me the space and sort of bearing witness to it, but making them comfortable enough to be able to share. And I think that's when you say about the framework, giving them that framework, I give them the questions in advance so that they're not caught on the hop, but that doesn't stop the conversation naturally evolving, and we get onto other things, and it just flows and they feel comfortable enough to open up. So yeah, that's been a real eye-opener
Yeah,
really.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think your pillars, the Bliss pillars, bravery, laughter, inspiration, spark, and success, without even realizing, because there's such close values and pillars to you and your journey, naturally, you we when they are values, like I talk a lot about values with you in our program and all that stuff, but when the values guide how we behave, right? So even on the journey, and I've wrote this down here, even on the journey of building this podcast and building the content plan and going through the program and everything like that that we've done over the last few months, going from the start point, if you really think about it, creating a podcast and putting it out on a public platform with the intention of growing it in front of a large audience requires that little bit of bravery, right?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Like I was
It
bricking it, watching it count down, going out. I was like, "Oh my god, what am I doing?" And I had to fight a lot of negativity and all those self-critical voices of, who are you to be doing this? Who's going to listen to this? And you've just got to put that to one side and think of the greater good of getting those stories out there.
100%. And um, it's. I think it would be fair to say maybe I'm not that funny. Maybe I'm not. But what I would say is because one of my close values is make meaningful relationships and build meaningful connections. Because we've done that, we've kind of had a laugh along the way. It's never felt like a authority, like downward client relationship. It's
Oh
always
no,
been
not at all.
your impulse, my impulse, and we've had
Yeah,
a laugh along the way. Again, laughter being a pillar, right?
yeah,
You've had guests on the podcast which are very inspiring and inspiring you to tell more stories. And again, I don't want to answer this for you. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that's probably giving you a spark to go, this is a mission that I'm on now, right?
definitely, yeah, definitely.
And obviously you can expand on this, over time, you're going to see success from it. So actually the journey that you're on now fit them pillars perfectly well, even though it's not you went in a terrible place to start.
Yeah, it
Maybe
doesn't have to be a
like,
traumatic event to
yeah,
start off.
it might not have been a
Yeah,
traumatic event per se, but there was probably some frustrations about, like you said, editing and time consumption and all that stuff. And obviously you run a successful business outside of this as well. But can you see how them values guide us? Like I'm fascinated by this as well because
yeah,
it's human nature, right? And if you're not clear on your values, I think then it's going to be pretty clear to the audience quick. But actually, what we're doing now fits into them.
yeah. I hadn't actually thought of that, but yeah, that's really true. Yeah, because as I said, I have had to take a leap of faith with it because it is very exposing to put your voice out there, and obviously there's all the trolls on the internet who might come out of the woodwork. But I think, as I say, I, the thing that's always struck me with this, and I suppose my comedy as well, is that I had no choice. I had to do it, and that was the push. That there was no question in my mind that I wanted to do it, and it needed to be done. And I guess that's where the brave element came in.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, so yeah, I mean that to me is super fulfilling because I always think your values will guide you even when you're not aware of them.
Yeah,
So actually bringing them to the surface a little bit and actually going, right, this is a value of mine. like when I done this exercise myself, one of mine was own every challenge. So every time I was faced with something when my back was a bit against the wall and I was in a challenging situation, whether that be financially or career wise or personally, actually owning the challenge and being like, you know what, like even some technical issues with YouTube or video editing, I'm always like, right, I'm on it,
Yeah.
I'm owning that. It's like, it's just how we behave, right? They just guide that behavior. It's not,
Yeah.
and it's just that I recognize it and go, if I don't do that, that's not gonna land well with people who I want to work with. And I think the reason why we've kind of worked quite well together, again, you don't want to put words in your mouth, is because them values align really well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also it's being reflected back to you. I think I discussed it on one of the podcasts about the concept of believing mirrors, when someone mirrors you back in your most powerful light. And I think that's what I've got from you, that you were on board, you understood the concept, you understood what I wanted to do, but you fully believe in it as well. Like you say, you're not just blowing smoke, you genuinely believe in what I'm doing. And I think
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
really important
But,
for me, because they say, I think it's Dilt's model that's like the triangle, and at the top of the triangle is values. And if you can align values, that's the most powerful force that you can have. So, and that's really
yeah,
important to me, that someone shares my values and isn't just doing it for a dime or whatever, you know.
I think I always think as well, people, when people like hear this stuff on the internet and people talk about values and like principles, morals, and all that stuff, it can kind of come across a bit like hippie-ish and a bit woo-woo, a bit out
Yeah.
there. But actually, it's the most authentic thing you could possibly do.
Mm,
And
yeah.
like, I've been guilty of it in the past where I've not acted in line with my values and I've done some stuff I'm not very proud of in the past. And that's it's. I've always re-censored myself a lot with this stuff, because it's like if you do something that you're not proud of, you know that you're not acting in a way that you're proud of, so you you don't want to do that anymore. But
Yeah.
when you do that, you're kind of away from your moral compass a little bit, or away from your values, so you just do stuff that you don't want to do. So I always think if people recognise that, it really helps guide better behaviour, um, better working relationships, better personal relationships, better connections. Not to say there's never going to be any issues or problems or anything like that, but you're able to deal with them better because it can guide your decision making a little better. Whereas if you're not aware of them, actually, they become like you kind of make dodgy decisions and all that kind of stuff. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah. I
um,
think the problem is people have disconnected from their values because they're subjected to so much external content now, that they don't know what their values are. And then that comes into your intuition as well, that people, we have got a gut instinct, and it's called gut instinct for a reason. We know when something's not right. If you meet someone, you're like, I'm not feeling their vibe, and sometimes you ignore it, and then you find out later down the road that you were right. And I think it's about stopping enough to get in tune with your values and actually go, well, what are my values? They might be completely different. There will be for everybody, but I think it's just being aware that
100%.
values are such a central core, and then getting in tune with them again.
100%. And I think as your life sort of as life goes on and you move through your life in different ways, your values might change as well. Like at 37 now, my values are a lot different to what they were at 27. I mean, I've
Yeah,
got a family now and I've got my own business now. I wasn't anything like that back then. So my decision making was guided a lot more personally now than what it was in the past. So it kind of evolved over time. Um, and I think having recognized that and built a framework of that and created a platform of that people can buy into. Um, I've told you this. I think it's going to be massive, and it's really going to be good. It's really, really good thing. For anyone watching, um, you well, obviously we started with creating a podcast and the editing side of it, but also what we've done was the my formerly social media pro program, now called video content pro because it's a lot video focused. Kind of one of the same thing. To give everyone an idea, within that program, there's 4 phases. So the first part is the personal brand builder. I'm big on personal brand. I think over time it's going to become even more massive. The next generation of millionaires and billionaires and wealth creation is going to be centered around personal brands, not big company, corporate, conglomerate logos and stuff like that. And then we do like an ideal client immersion. Then we do a content creation system, and then obviously we put in place like the frameworks of an offer and a sales system and all that stuff. And we dived into this stuff in great detail within the personal brand builder. So what's the mission, what's the personal brand. So through that process, can you talk a little bit about sort of not only what you got out of that, but how it's been sort of implemented within your system, basically?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I didn't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't what I got. I think I would thought it was much more sort of not frivolous, sort of the sort of niceties of, well, yeah, we need to do this post then and do it like that. So the actual depth we went into with the personal brand stuff was really, really useful, insightful for me because well, number one, it reminded me of my origin story, which sometimes you can get a bit disconnected from when you're focusing on so many other things. And then it really helped focus on the content that I want to produce and put out there because I I don't want to put crap content out basically just for the sake of the algorithm. Oh right, I'm going to do 2 posts a day, and it just be generic rubbish. And I think going back to the origin story and the branding, the personal brand really helped focus my attention on what I want to do, and then obviously actually replicating the 5 pillars of bliss in everything that I do. I think I don't know why I hadn't thought of that before, but in terms of both content and then ultimately when I'm delivering workshops as well, because I've got lots of activities and things that will be done through the workshops in person and online, but actually centering them all around the pillars makes the perfect sense now, which is something that I probably wouldn't have got to without having gone through the process. And then yeah, just the amount of content you can generate from one source. So like with the podcast, for example, we're breaking it down into the bite-sized chunks. Then we can get smaller clips for social media, and then everything builds around that. So I think I've finally got a clear strategy because I've tried things before where I like have Monday motivation, Wednesday wisdom, and I'm like, oh, I die inside a bit when I used to, like, I didn't know what I was doing, and I just wanted to post something, but I was like, I'm just adding to all the other crap that's out there, and I think understanding the difference between a value post, which is what you've explained to me, which is actually giving value, and then obviously the magnet posts that draw people in. That's something that's I've really learned a lot from. Um, and yeah, just having that overall strategy rather than just a sort of scattergun approach of, well, I'll do this today. And I think obviously I'll still hop on when things come, but actually having a clear strategy that people come to recognize as the brand, but in an authentic way, not a corporate way, so that it's getting to the right people. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? Finding your ideal client, and as you always say, you're looking for the former versions of yourself as your ideal client. And I think that's something again that I've learned, that yeah, because when I've done talks and I say what's happened to me, that's when I see people, the lights go on in people's eyes, like, oh, I've been through that. Yeah, oh yeah, actually, yeah, it would help me if I quit drinking probably, and things like that. So yeah, I think it's that
Yeah.
overall strategy, but keeping it authentic, which is a key thing for me.
It's so nice. It's so nice to hear you say that as well, because that's like the complete idea of why I put that together. Um, because I was working with a lot of people, and it's very easy to get caught up in the thing of like build a massive audience, get a lot of likes, get loads of views, all that
Mm,
stuff. Which in the grand scheme matter. Like getting views on YouTube is going to matter. Like um getting a big audience, it matters, right? Because you can't help anyone if you're not in front of anyone. Like
yeah.
that matters. But it like the reason why I do it that way is because if you don't build out the personal brand in the right way, if you're not doing it in line with your values, if you're just throwing stuff out there to get attention, you're going to get found out really quick.
Mm.
You're going to get, like, people, you see people go up and then they come down really quick. And if you look at the big accounts now, like the Elon Musks of the world, the Stephen Bartlett's of the world, the Gary Vaynerchuk's of the world, the Mel Robbins, your idol Mel Robbins of the world, they've got such a strong personal brand that they can kind of, again, going back to framework, they can have a framework that people can go into at every level of awareness where she can help someone, right? And she can, let's be transparent about it, charge a premium for her closer attention, essentially.
Mm.
So if you want to get closer to her personally, it's obviously a higher investment price. Let's say, using Mel Robbins as an example. So having that model is exactly why I do it that way, because one, it gives you the framework to obviously get people into your audience. But when people are in the audience, you're actually giving them something at every step of that journey, right? And then over time, if and when the audience builds and builds and builds, you're not becoming over-consumed by trying to help everyone at once. Because the last thing you want to do is grow by 10,000 followers and not have the system and the infrastructure there to cater to 10,000 followers, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And like you've seen it on post. You've seen the negativity. We know people who've had, their brands ripped apart by comments, and the comment section can be a brutal place, right?
Yeah.
People, discrediting them, all this kind of stuff, and it's quite a scary thing that you've got. Like, again, going back to bravery, you've got to be brave around. And if you grow a big following, you're going to get a little bit of that. Like, it goes with the territory. But actually, how can you navigate it? How can you navigate that world? And that's essentially why I built it. So it's really nice to hear you say that. And I appreciate it, actually. Because you, and it's the same thing. Like, I bought into Building Bliss. Like, I really get it. And I believe it's going to succeed. And it's the same thing the other way. Like, if you don't buy into that process, like, some people won't buy into the process. Some people will be like, well, I want to get 20,000 likes on a post every time. Okay, but what does that give you?
Yeah.
What does that actually
That's just vanity,
for
isn't
you? Right? Like,
yeah.
And this is where you'll see, like, accounts with 6-figure followings, 100,000, 200, 1 million followers, but they can't sell anything because you meet them in real life and they're like, oh, I'm not doing that well. And then you've got 1 million followers. Why?
Yeah, it's just influencers like, oh, I'm having a glass of wine here, and they're not. It's not really achieving anything in the world, is it?
So it's building something and growing something, but with a purpose, with a mission, with a set of values that you're aligned to. And it's okay if people don't align with them values. That's okay. You're not there to help them. But you're going to bring in a big audience that you are able to help. And that's when you're going to get raving fans who will literally do pretty much everything you want them to do. Like I would do with certain people who I really respect, and the way you would do with Mel Robbins, who you really respect.
Yeah.
It's such a big... and it's human nature, right? Like, we know this stuff. Like, in marketing, we know that we're being marketed to. We know we're part of a framework, or some people call it a funnel. But if it's done in a compelling way and with integrity, actually, we go with it because, like, I always say I'm the easiest person to sell to in the world.
Yeah.
I'm the easiest person to sell to in the world. But it's got to be right for me. If it's crap, I won't buy it.
Yeah.
But if it's something that if it's something that really hits the home with me, and it's really sort of a good thing, I'm the easiest person in the world to buy.
Yeah,
I'll
you're
buy
all
anything.
in.
Yeah, 100%. So I suppose we've done half an hour already. That's longer than what I anticipated anyway. But if you could recap over the last few months and give an idea of where you want to take the podcast, and obviously I'm going to link all the podcasts around this video anyway. But if you just give a little bit of a recap and then sort of tell us where you want to go over the next sort of 6 months to a year and get the channel where it wants to be, or where you want to get the channel to. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I suppose I look back, it was actually I think it was the 1st of March that I actually recorded my first podcast, 2023, which gives an indicator of how much I struggled because I recorded 2 in close succession. Lots of stuff happened in between, and then they actually went out on the 9th of February. So almost a year it took me to get to the point that I wanted to. But now I think we've got a great system in place working together. My idea is that it's going to be a weekly series released in 6-week blocks with a bit of a break in between, where I will probably just hop on and do some podcasts of my own, recapping really what I've learned, because I've learned an awful lot from the people that I've spoken to. And out of that, I'm looking to try and build a community around the podcast. So I've set up a Facebook group, because some of the other collectives that I'm in, you can get as much inspiration from other people as the guest. So the guest is like the catalyst, but then people can come on and go, like someone said after they'd watched Maddie's, actually, I really want to write my memoirs. And this has given me hope that A, it's achievable, B, it's something that I really want to do. And now I've got someone I can talk to. I can contact Maddie and go, how do I go about that? So that's the perfect result for me. They've been inspired, they're taking action, and they've got somewhere they can go to take that action. So I really want to build that community of avid listeners who have, and they share what they've got out of it. And then, yeah, as I say, just keep running it weekly, keep finding the right guests, and I'm hoping that as more people listen, they'll go, oh, actually, I've got a story to tell, and I'm willing to share it because I think it'll help other people. Like, for example, the guests we've got coming up, we've got someone who's got a chronic illness, who hasn't been able to eat solid food for 2.5 years, which is an interesting story. We've got someone who's a mindset coach, someone who's younger, which is interesting. I want to get a real diversity of people on there that tell different stories. We've got someone who is deaf, which I think is going to be quite a groundbreaking episode, because I'm not sure how many deaf people have appeared on podcasts. Obviously, that'll be fully captioned on the YouTube channel. And yeah, I'm just going to be hoovering up people as I go. If I meet someone interesting, I'm going to hoover them up for the podcast. And then ultimately, I'm sponsoring a tent at the Womanifest Festival in July, which is a women's empowerment and wellbeing festival over the whole weekend in Frodsham. And I'm going to be putting on some comedy workshops there and getting people to do their first 2 minutes of stand-up, and also doing some meditation classes. So that's going to be exciting to get people over that hurdle. And yeah, ultimately, what the podcast will be there, and then we'll be taking it and making it accessible so that people can then come and experience those pillars, either through one-to-one time with me, retreats and workshops, and then also on the corporate wellness side of going into businesses and embedding these values in their company and in their staff, to improve staff well-being, because that is a massive problem as well, the mental health in the workplace. So yeah, it's just world domination, really. I'm not looking for much.
Yeah. We'll just take over the world. We'll be fine.
Yeah.
Nothing could go wrong there.
No.
Mary, thanks so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure and continues to be an absolute pleasure working with you. I can't wait to see where this podcast gets to. I can't wait to see where the business gets to, where Building Bliss gets to. I'm going to put all the links to your profiles and everything around this video when I post it. But if anyone wants to sort of tap into Building Bliss and sort of get a deeper insight, what are your social handles and
so on Instagram it's at Building Bliss Today, and the same on YouTube. The podcast's available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and Amazon Music. You can just search Building Bliss Podcast and that will come up. And then my website is www.buildingbliss.co.uk.
Brilliant. I love it. Thanks so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.